I need you to stop what you're doing right now. I mean it. Whatever you're doing, scrolling, cooking, sitting at the table, I need you to pause for just a moment, because what I'm about to tell you is something I wish someone had told me years ago. It's something that changed the way I look at my kitchen, at my refrigerator, at the simple act of warming up last night's leftovers, and once you hear it, you're not going to be able to unhear it. What if I told you that right now, inside your home, there's a habit so ordinary, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life that almost no one questions it? A habit that millions of people perform every single day, maybe even multiple times a day, without the faintest idea that they could be slowly, quietly, doing damage to the most important organ in their body. What if the thing putting your brain at risk isn't some exotic chemical or environmental toxin, but something sitting in your fridge at this very moment? I've spent years paying attention to health. I've read studies, talked to people who lost their parents to dementia, sat with friends who went through cancer treatment, and through all of that, I kept coming back to the same question. Why do these diseases feel like they come out of nowhere? One day someone is fine. The next, they're forgetting names, then faces, then their own children's birthdays. How does that happen? How does a healthy, functioning human brain begin to deteriorate? And why does it feel so sudden when the process was probably happening slowly for years, maybe decades? The answer, I came to believe, isn't always dramatic. It isn't always genetic destiny or terrible luck. Sometimes, and this is the part that unsettled me most, it's the accumulation of small decisions. The ones that seem completely harmless. The ones we make without thinking. Every single morning, every single evening, every time we open the microwave and press the button. I'm talking about reheating food. Specifically, I'm talking about 5 foods that most people reheat regularly, that are present in homes all over the world, and that under certain conditions that are far more common than anyone wants to admit, can undergo chemical transformations that produce compounds capable of triggering inflammation, damaging cells, and over time, contributing to exactly the kind of diseases that we're all desperate to avoid. Let me be honest with you from the start. I'm not here to make you panic. I'm not here to tell you that you've been poisoning yourself and your family and that everything is ruined. That's not what this is. What this is information. Real, documented, science-backed information that most people never hear because it doesn't come wrapped in a headline, because it isn't dramatic enough for the evening news, because it builds slowly, just like the damage it can cause. And because I believe that the people who watch this channel deserve to understand their own bodies and make informed choices about what they put into them, I'm going to walk you through everything. Not in a way designed to frighten you, but in a way designed to genuinely change how you think about something you do every single day. Let's start with something I never expected to learn. When I first heard that reheating certain foods could be dangerous, my reaction was probably exactly like yours. Skepticism. A kind of defensive dismissal that kicks in when someone threatens a routine that feels completely benign. Reheating food is as normal as breathing. People have done it forever. My grandmother did it. Her grandmother did it. How could something so ordinary carry genuine risk? But here's the thing about science. It doesn't care about our routines. It doesn't care what we were taught or what feels normal, or how many generations of our family did something a certain way. Chemistry operates by its own rules, and when you apply heat to certain molecular structures more than once, especially after they've been sitting at room temperature or stored improperly, things happen. Bonds break, new compounds form, bacteria multiply and produce toxins that no amount of heat will destroy. And the body, that remarkable and resilient machine, absorbs all of it. The first time, the consequences are barely detectable. Maybe a little bloating. Maybe nothing at all. The body compensates. It defends itself. But the second time, and the 10th time, and the 500th time over years of repetition, the accumulation begins to tell a different story. I want you to think about the word accumulation for a second, because I think it's one of the most important and most underestimated words in all of human health. We tend to think about risk in terms of dramatic events. A car accident, a fall, a single meal that sends someone to the hospital. But the diseases that are destroying the most lives, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, they don't usually work that way. They work through accumulation. They work through the daily repetition of small insults to the body that individually amount to almost nothing, but collectively, over years and decades, shift the internal environment from one that resists disease to one that invites it. Chronic inflammation is the engine behind so much of this, and chronic inflammation is fed, quietly and consistently, by the foods we eat, the toxins we're exposed to, and yes, the way we prepare and reheat those foods day after day after day. So let me tell you about these 5 foods. Let me tell you what actually happens to them when you reheat them the wrong way. And let me tell you what you can do instead, because this story has a practical ending. The first food surprised me more than almost anything else I've learned in this space, because it is perhaps the most humble, the most universal, the most seemingly inoffensive food on earth. It is rice. Plain, simple, everyday rice. Rice is a staple. It feeds more human beings than any other food on the planet. Billions of people eat it every day, and in households everywhere, it's also one of the most commonly reheated foods. Made in large batches, stored in the fridge or sometimes just left on the counter and then warmed up again for the next meal. It seems completely fine. It looks fine. It smells fine. And that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Here's what most people don't know. Raw rice, before it's ever cooked, naturally contains spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. These spores are extraordinarily resilient. They survive the cooking process. They survive at temperatures that would kill almost any other microorganism. And when cooked rice is left to cool at room temperature, especially for more than an hour or two, those spores begin to germinate. The bacteria wake up. They multiply. And as they multiply, they produce toxins. Here's the critical point. Reheating the rice will kill the bacteria themselves, but it will not destroy the toxins they've already produced. Those toxins are heat-stable. They remain in the rice, invisible, odorless, completely undetectable without laboratory analysis. And when you eat that rice, you consume the toxins with it. The Food Standards Agency in the United Kingdom, one of the most conservative and evidence-based food safety bodies in the world, has explicitly warned about this risk. Their guidance is direct. Rice should not be left at room temperature for extended periods, should be refrigerated quickly after cooking, and should ideally not be reheated more than once. Now, in the short term, Bacillus cereus toxins cause food poisoning, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, the kind of symptoms we usually attribute to something I ate, without ever identifying the specific cause. But what I find more disturbing is the question of long-term, low-level exposure. What happens when someone regularly consumes small amounts of these toxins over months and years, amounts not large enough to trigger obvious illness, but large enough to contribute to systemic inflammation? The research on this specific question is still developing, but the framework of chronic low-level toxin exposure and its relationship to cellular damage and disease is well established in the broader scientific literature. The second food is one that almost everyone reheats. It's on dinner tables around the world. It's in meal prep containers in gym bags and office refrigerators, and it is one of the most protein-dense, nutritionally complete foods available to us. I'm talking about chicken. Cooked chicken is a wonderful food. It's lean, it's high in protein, it's versatile, but chicken also has a structural characteristic that makes it particularly sensitive to the effects of reheating. Its proteins. When chicken is cooked, its proteins denature. They unfold and restructure into a form the body can digest. That process is complete and beneficial. But when chicken is reheated, especially when reheated unevenly, which is almost inevitable in a microwave, the proteins are subjected to a second round of structural change. Research has shown that the reheating of protein-rich foods can promote the formation of compounds called advanced glycation end products, or ages. These are compounds that form when proteins and sugars react under heat, and they are associated in the scientific literature with oxidative stress, inflammation, and an increased risk of chronic diseases. Beyond the chemistry, there's also the microbial dimension. Chicken, more than almost any other food, is a substrate on which bacteria thrive when the temperature is not perfectly controlled. The danger zone, between 4 and 60 degrees Celsius, is where pathogens like Salmonella, Campylobacter, and others multiply rapidly. Cooked chicken that has been stored at borderline temperatures and then reheated unevenly may not reach the internal temperature required to ensure safety throughout. And again, even if the bacteria are killed, certain byproducts and structural changes remain. The deeper concern, the one I kept returning to as I researched this, is what repeated exposure to these altered compounds does to the gut, and through the gut to the brain. The gut-brain axis is one of the most exciting and rapidly evolving areas of neuroscience. We now understand that the health of the gut microbiome has a direct and measurable effect on brain function, mood, cognitive performance, and the risk of neurodegenerative disease. A diet that chronically introduces inflammatory compounds into the gut is a diet that is, over time, compromising the very system that protects the brain. The third food is one that might genuinely shock you, because we think of it as one of the healthiest things we can eat. We put it in soups, we roast it, we mash it, we serve it to children as one of their first solid foods. I'm talking about potatoes. Potatoes, when cooked and stored correctly, are a perfectly healthy food. But they have a vulnerability that few people are aware of. Cooked potatoes left at room temperature, particularly overnight or even for several hours, create an ideal environment for the growth of Clostridium botulinum, the bacterium responsible for botulism. This is especially relevant when potatoes are wrapped in foil, which creates the anaerobic, low-oxygen conditions that this organism prefers. Botulinum toxin is one of the most potent naturally occurring toxins on Earth. And while classic botulism from potato dishes is relatively rare, the conditions that allow it to occur are more common in home kitchens than official reports suggest, because mild cases are frequently misattributed to other causes. But there is another concern with reheated potatoes that is perhaps more broadly relevant to the cancer conversation. When starchy foods are cooked at high temperatures, they produce a compound called acrylamide. Acrylamide forms as part of the Maillard reaction, the same process that browns bread, and creates the satisfying crust on roasted potatoes. It is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a probable human carcinogen. And critically, reheating already cooked starchy foods can increase acrylamide formation with each subsequent heating cycle. The research on acrylamide in food is extensive. It has been studied for its ability to damage DNA, disrupt nerve function, and, of particular relevance to our broader conversation, cross the blood-brain barrier, where it can cause neuronal damage. Studies in experimental models have demonstrated clear dose-dependent effects on the nervous system. The human epidemiological research is still ongoing, but the mechanistic evidence is compelling, and it is the reason that food safety agencies around the world have been actively working to reduce acrylamide levels in the food supply. Every time you take yesterday's roasted potatoes, put them in a hot pan, and reheat them until they're crispy again, which is, let's be honest, exactly how most of us prefer them. You are potentially increasing the concentration of this compound in what you're about to eat. The fourth food stopped me cold when I first encountered the science behind it, because it belongs to a category of foods we are constantly told to eat more of. It's a leafy green vegetable. It is spinach, and by extension, other nitrate-rich vegetables like celery, beets, and lettuce. Here's the mechanism, and I want you to follow this carefully because it's important. Spinach and other leafy greens are naturally high in nitrates. In their raw or freshly cooked form, these nitrates are not only harmless but potentially beneficial. They play a role in cardiovascular health and have been studied for their effects on athletic performance and blood pressure. But when spinach is cooked and then cooled, bacterial enzymatic activity begins to convert those nitrates into nitrites. This process accelerates at room temperature. When you then reheat the spinach, especially multiple times, you drive further conversion and also create conditions for the formation of compounds called nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as probable or definite human carcinogens. They form when nitrites combine with amines, compounds naturally present in protein-containing foods. The stomach, with its acidic environment and the presence of proteins from the rest of the meal, is an ideal site for nitrosamine formation if nitrite levels are elevated. This is why the question of nitrite content in food is not merely theoretical. It is directly connected to gastric cancer risk, and the relationship has been documented in the epidemiological literature for decades. The irony here is profound. Spinach is almost universally presented as one of the healthiest foods on Earth. It is nutritionally extraordinary, rich in iron, folate, vitamins K and C, and powerful antioxidants. And it is. Eaten fresh or cooked once and consumed immediately, it is excellent. But reheated repeatedly, stored at marginal temperatures, warmed up in a microwave alongside last night's chicken, it can quietly become something quite different. The same principle applies to beet greens, chard, arugula, and celery. All of them high-nitrate vegetables that undergo the same chemical transformation under the same conditions. If you regularly eat vegetable-heavy meals and reheat your leftovers, this is information you need to have. The fifth food is one that billions of people eat every morning. It is a food so fundamental to so many cultures that its absence from a meal feels like something is genuinely missing. I'm talking about eggs. Eggs are, nutritionally speaking, extraordinary. They contain high-quality protein with all essential amino acids, healthy fats, choline, which is critically important for brain health, and a remarkable range of vitamins and minerals. But eggs are also a food that does not respond well to reheating. The proteins in eggs are particularly sensitive to heat. When an egg is cooked, the proteins coagulate into a specific structure. When that already cooked egg is reheated, especially at high temperatures or for extended periods, those proteins break down further and begin to form compounds that can be difficult for the body to process. The nitrogen content of egg proteins, when subjected to repeated heat, can result in the formation of compounds linked to digestive stress and, in higher concentrations, to oxidative damage. There is also the issue of cholesterol oxidation. Egg yolks contain cholesterol, dietary cholesterol that, in the context of a fresh, properly cooked egg, is handled well by the body and is not the cardiovascular villain it was once believed to be. However, when cholesterol is subjected to repeated high heat, it can oxidize, forming compounds called oxysterols. Oxysterols are associated in the research literature with inflammation, atherosclerosis, and, of increasing interest to neuroscientists, with changes in brain cholesterol metabolism that may be relevant to neurodegenerative disease. A scrambled egg eaten fresh from the pan is a profoundly different thing, at the molecular level, from a scrambled egg reheated in the microwave 2 days after it was cooked. We tend not to think about this because the difference is invisible. The egg looks and tastes essentially the same, but inside it, the chemistry has changed. I want to pause here and bring these 5 foods together, because I think what's most important is not any individual item, but the pattern they collectively reveal. The pattern is this. The way we treat food after cooking matters enormously. The act of cooking is a transformation, a structural and chemical change that creates something new. Reheating is a second transformation. Reheating again is a third. Each transformation creates the potential for new compounds, new bacterial activity, new chemical reactions. And each of those compounds, those bacteria, those reactions, absorbed into the body, processed by the gut, circulated through the bloodstream, contributes in small but cumulative ways to the internal environment that either protects health or erodes it, Chronic inflammation is the hidden thread connecting all 5 foods discussed. Unlike the normal inflammation that heals wounds, chronic inflammation is a silent, persistent immune response linked to cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, heart disease, and diabetes. Diet is one of the most powerful drivers of this state. Cancer develops when cells begin replicating without control, and an internal environment marked by oxidative stress, DNA damage from compounds like acrylamide and nitrosamines, and immune dysregulation makes that process easier. The point isn't that reheating rice causes cancer directly. It's that chronic exposure to these compounds, repeated over years, shifts the odds in a dangerous direction. Alzheimer's doesn't just erase memories. It erases identity. For decades, it was seen as purely genetic, but science now shows that lifestyle and environment play a major role. Gut health is central to this. The microbiome communicates directly with the brain through the vagus nerve, regulating immune function and producing neurotransmitters. When the gut is disrupted by inflammatory compounds, like the ages from reheated chicken, acrylamide from potatoes, nitrosamines from spinach, and oxysterols from eggs, it sends damaging signals to the brain, fueling neuroinflammation, which is now recognized as a key driver of neurodegeneration. The conclusion is not despair. It's that the solution exists, it's practical, and it starts with understanding what happens to food every time it's reheated. For rice, the rule is clear and unambiguous. Cook what you'll eat it fresh, and if you must store it, refrigerate it within 1 hour of cooking. Never leave cooked rice at room temperature for extended periods. Reheat it only once, thoroughly, and discard any leftovers after a single reheating. For chicken and other protein-rich meats, ensure that storage is consistently at proper refrigeration temperatures, not in the temperature danger zone. When reheating, use methods that heat the food evenly and thoroughly throughout, not just on the surface. An oven is generally better than a microwave for this purpose, and consider whether the meal can be designed so that the protein is freshly cooked even when the rest is reheated. For potatoes and other starchy foods, avoid storing them at room temperature and avoid reheating them repeatedly. If you're going to reheat potatoes, do it once at a moderate temperature, without trying to recreate the crispy exterior, which requires the high temperatures that drive acrylamide formation. For spinach and other high-nitrate leafy greens, the simplest guidance is to eat them fresh or to cook them and consume them immediately. If you have leftover vegetable dishes containing these greens, refrigerate them promptly and consume them the next day rather than storing them longer. And avoid repeated reheating. For eggs, the recommendation is arguably the most straightforward of all. Eggs are quick to cook. If you have the option, cook them fresh. A fresh scrambled egg takes 3 minutes. The difference in what you're consuming is, at the molecular level, significant. If you must reheat egg-containing dishes, do so gently, once, and do not add more heat than is necessary to warm them through. The broader principle underlying all of these specific recommendations is one of mindful simplicity. Cook less at one time and cook more often. Prioritize freshness over convenience where possible. Refrigerate promptly, and treat each reheating as something that changes the food, because it does. I know that convenience is real. I know that life doesn't always allow for the ideal. There are evenings when batch cooking is the only thing standing between your family and a fast food run, and reheated rice is genuinely better than many alternatives. I'm not here to make the perfect the enemy of the good. What I'm here to do is give you information that allows you to make choices with open eyes, rather than in ignorance of the risks. Because here's what I keep coming back to. The diseases we fear most, the ones that take our parents from us, that threaten to take us from our children, are not random. They are not acts of fate that we are powerless to influence. More and more, the science suggests that the choices we make daily, the habits we maintain over years and decades, the internal environment we either protect or erode through 1,000 small decisions, these things matter enormously. They may not determine everything, but they shape the odds. And understanding what happens to rice when it sits on the counter overnight, understanding why spinach reheated for the third time is not the same food it was when it came fresh from the pan, understanding the chemistry of what heat does to protein and starch and cholesterol, that understanding is not a burden. It's a form of power, the power to make choices that protect your brain, your body, and your future. The people I've known who were touched by dementia, and I think about them often, didn't know any of this. Their families didn't know. The conversations happening at the dinner table were not about nitrosamines or bacillus cereus or acrylamide. They were about the day, about work, about the children. And I don't say that as a criticism. How could they have known? The information was buried in academic journals, scattered across food safety guidelines that nobody reads, absent from the mainstream conversations about health that most people actually encounter. That's what this channel is for. That's why I keep making these videos, why I keep going back to the science, why I keep having these conversations with you. Because the gap between what the research says and what the average person knows is vast and consequential. And bridging that gap, one video at a time, feels like the most important thing I can be doing with my time. If you've made it to this point in the video, I want you to know something. You are already different from who you were 33 minutes ago. You now carry information that most people don't have. You know what happens to rice when it's left out. You know what reheating does to the proteins in chicken and the cholesterol in eggs. You know about nitrosamines and acrylamide and the gut-brain axis and the relationship between chronic inflammation and the diseases we fear most. And that knowledge is real, and it belongs to you, and it can change the small daily choices that, over time, add up to something much bigger than any single meal. Please take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Every time you subscribe, you're not just clicking a button. You're joining a community of people who believe that understanding the science behind everyday life is worth the time. We cover everything here: food, brain health, the habits that accelerate aging and the ones that slow it down, the research that doesn't make the headlines but absolutely should. New videos go up regularly, and every one of them is built around the same commitment: real information, honestly presented, without the sensationalism and without the fear-mongering, but without sugarcoating either. The next time you open your refrigerator and look at yesterday's leftovers, I want you to think about what you've learned today. Not with anxiety, but with clarity. Ask yourself, how was this stored? How many times has it been reheated? Is there a fresher option? Those questions asked consistently over years, they add up. They protect your gut. They protect your brain. They protect the life you're building. If this video gave you something valuable, hit subscribe, share it with someone you care about, and come back for the next one. Because what we're doing here matters, and so do you. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.